Well, good evening, Don. The economy is sputtering. The Obama's final farewell tour in Asia was an absolute disaster. The Chinese wouldn't meet him at the plane. And we have a guest tonight, Jess Money, who has a book called Public Enemies. We'll get to him right after the break. I'm Dan Perkins.
Speaking of public enemies, Hillary says she's not ill. Is that a lie? This is Don Mazzella.
It's time for Two Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host, talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings.
Well, welcome back. We have a special guest tonight. Don and I had the chance to interview him on our other show a couple of weeks ago, and we were so impressed with Jess and the story about his book and his life, we decided to invite him to come on the big show at 8 o'clock on iHeartRadio. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted this Jess, who is the author of Public Enemies. The best way I can talk about him is he's a guy who played by all the rules and figured out later in life that the rules were stacked against him. So, Jess, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's talk about your book.
Well, thanks for having me on. Before we jump into this, in preparation for the show, I decided I should brush up on my Shakespeare, so I went to Wiki to look up Two Gentlemen from Verona, and the last line of the Wiki summary says, "The Duke pardons the outlaws," which sort of sounds like Comey and Lynch with Hillary's emails.
I'd agree.
Right. Anyway.
That Shakespeare is Two Gentlemen from Verona. We're the two guys from Verona, so we're much more honorable.
Slang is in.
Right.
Anyway, to answer your question more directly, I majored in political science with a minor in econ, and I've been a writer in many different fields over the years. And the book Public Enemies is a fictional look at what a modern Second American Revolution might look like, how it might get started, what the issues would be, how the power structure would react, and hopefully what the outcome would be. And as you said in my introduction, the central character is a guy who's lived his life by all the rules, done everything we require and admire of our citizens, and ended up getting shafted. And the public enemies in the book are the politicians. They're the true public enemies, along with the banksters and the corrupt CEOs. And he goes after them as a way to publicize some constitutional reforms. My personal feeling is we always hear about the Constitution as a framework of our government, but I've come to realize that we must consider it as a fence. It's a fence around government, and keep government on the reservation and keep undue private influence out. And so anyway, that's in a nutshell. I'm getting some great reviews on Amazon, which always makes a writer feel good.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question, if I could, starting off the interview here. There was a report today out of Europe that the huge amount of Islamic migration into Europe has created a younger group of people who cannot find any employment, and they're becoming more and more radicalized because of the lack of opportunity, because there are so many of them, that this particular author writing said that he believed that Europe was on the verge of a civil war. And there are some people who think that the election here in the United States this time around is that if, in fact, Mrs. Clinton were to be elected president, there could be a major revolution in the United States. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, as far as the Europeans are concerned, there has to be validity in that. Your one surefire formula for domestic unrest is to have less than ideal economic conditions to start with, and then import a bunch of people from other countries that do not share a common language, common culture, any of that sort of thing. It's a drain on the refugees, or the immigrants are a drain on social services, which are already strained. And let's face it, there's not enough space and not enough resources in what we refer to as the first world to handle all the people in the third world who might like to have a better life. It's a very bleak scenario, but that's true.
Yeah.
As far as domestically over here, I don't know about civil war, but I can say that I wouldn't be surprised in the next 4 years or so to see massive civil unrest, regardless of who's elected. But I think my personal opinion is that Hillary would exacerbate it. Events may overtake events not entirely of their own making or not entirely of their own control may overtake whoever's elected president, and which also is a big problem for Congress, because the people are going to want government to respond. They're going to want it to respond accordingly, and eventually they're going to get to a point where they don't much care whether they're blaming a Democratic or a Republican president, Democrats or Republicans in Congress. It's a pox on all their houses.
But, thinking about what you were saying there, and Don and I are both authors, published multiple books, and, it's interesting what you were talking about, because I don't know whether it was by choice or only by accident. You left out one particular group of people, which I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for Don, have created even more damage to this country than the politicians. That's the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who are making laws and changing rules without even congressional approval that have tremendously adverse impacts on our lives.
Well, I would agree with that. And in fact, in my book, Public Enemies, as the insurrection grows, the targets move down the ladder to what the character Tom Paine refers to as enablers. These are the people in the bureaucracy, whether they work at lobbying firms or government agencies or think tanks or whatever, that help the wheels of government grind forward. I love to ask people what was the only thing that Hitler needed. Not that I like to bring Hitler comparisons in, but it's the easy frame of reference. The only thing he needed to survive, to succeed, was Nazis. And the only thing the people at the top need is people farther down the rung who will implement their policies. A few hundred, a few thousand people exercising power at the top of this country can't do anything against 300 plus million Americans unless they have plenty of people who are willing to drink the Kool-Aid, take the orders, and move down the line. The other thing that you brought up that's very interesting about bureaucrats is that we've devolved from Congress making laws to Congress setting up structures where then regulators, bureaucrats, appointed and career professionals, whatever, actually are in charge of implementing that, and in many cases, those regulations that they devise are never approved by Congress and carry the weight and force of law.
Right.
So, not a good situation.
Just 1 second, Don. I just want to follow up. Since Obama's been in president, the federal government has added 35,000 bureaucrats. 35,000. Don, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting you put it this way. If you follow what the bureaucrats are doing, and I agree somewhat with you, they are, in effect, reinterpreting regulations that have been with us for 20, 30, sometimes even 50 years for new meaning. The Wall Street Journal has been doing a pretty good job over the last 8 years of pointing these things out, and the courts have done a fairly good job of pushing back on it. We just had it here. But Jess, you mentioned something else which I found fascinating. How you said that, if I heard you right, the Constitution is the fence around the reservation protecting us, and it's bureaucrats, if I heard you right, who are attacking us. Is that how you said it?
Well, you're close. Basically, I think we need to view the Constitution as a fence around government, and also as a barrier to keep undue influence out. But within the governmental structure, you've got all these bureaucrats who are charged by Congress with implementing legislation, and in many cases, the actual regulations and enforcement mechanisms that they come up with are never specifically approved by Congress. Heaven forbid Congress should actually be concerned with laws rather than fundraising for the next election. But as far as the new meaning of regulations, you didn't go far enough. I mean, the Attorney General, the head of the FBI, James Comey, invented a standard of intent to let Hillary Clinton off the hook on her emails, a standard of intent which does not appear in the black letter law. The law as written makes no mention of intent. It says if you do X, then you're guilty of Y. And this is just a grand demonstration of things that occur all the time on lower levels.
You know, I've covered Washington for a long time, and what you're saying is absolutely true. But when I first went to Washington in 1964, for instance, when Lyndon Johnson put the Civil Rights Act together, if you read the act, it's very specific what the government can and cannot do. It's also relatively short. And I think I have to agree with you, because if you look over these 50 years since that point, I think there's we tend to make laws that, like you say, are the interpretation shall be left to bureaucrats. Well, how would you change all of this?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know, given the size and scope of government, that you can change it structurally, but you can change it operationally with several things. First of all, it's my opinion that all discussions about laws and regulations should be done in public. If you're going to have a group of people get together to draft a law, that ought to be open to the public. It ought to be videotaped. It ought to be available over the internet. And if you do that, you're going to remove a lot of the backroom dealing and the backroom pressure and the special interest that gets in there and gets the regulations tweaked and twisted and contorted so black is white, yes is no, good is bad, and so forth and so on. The second thing, of course, is if you eliminate campaign contributions, then you get a lot fewer laws that are specifically written to carve out exceptions or carve out loopholes, favored by certain interests, whether they're right, left, or center. And so that's probably the way you have to attack it. You probably have to put it in public, and you have to remove the financial motivation to pervert the process. But I just don't see how in a government our size, or even the size of some state governments, I mean, Texas, California, New York, New York's not that physically huge, but Texas and California are physically huge numbers of people, vast differences in terrain, rural to high-density metropolitan. I just don't see how a legislature or a Congress could get into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. But what weeding is done needs to be done under the public scrutiny.
Jess, we just got a few seconds left. I want to ask you one follow-up question. As the author of this book, Public Enemies, what do you hope the reader will take away from it?
Well, first of all, since it's a novel, I hope they find it entertaining. I also hope that it causes them to think about what real reforms we need. The politicians love to play the public by getting us all infuriated over whether or not some NFL football player goes to one knee during the national anthem. It stirs up a lot of emotional response, but it also serves as a diversion away from the real elements. I would much rather we look at the tax structure that governs professional athletes who make $20 million a year.
Okay. So where can you get your book, Public Enemies, Jess?
It's exclusively on Amazon. It's available in hardback, paperback, audiobook, and ebook.
Well, Jess, thanks for being with us tonight. We enjoyed you, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. Good luck with your book.
Thank you much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And this is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
We're the two guys from Verona, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Well, the economy stinks. We had another message from the Federal Reserve last Thursday, Friday morning. One of the Fed governors thinks we should raise interest rates. And the market was off 397 points. The utility index, which is a little over 2%, the utility index, Don, was off 3.5%. Actually 3.6% on Friday. 3.6% doesn't sound like a lot. It was a lot in this context. The yield on the 10-year Treasury for 1 year is 1.6%, and the yield on the 30-year Treasury for 1 year is about 2.6. So in one day, you wiped out about 2 years' worth of interest on a 10-year Treasury position and about a year and a half on a 30-year Treasury in one trading session. The market came back yesterday, but didn't do too well today. In a blog that I posted to my clients yesterday, I cautioned that we might have to go back and test that bottom of last week. And sure enough, the utility index was off again today. The Fed seems to be, for some reason, and I really can't figure this out, Don. The week before, the Fed saw 94.5 million people out of work. The number of new jobs created at 151,000 was short between the number of 180 to 220 the street was looking for. The participation rate, 62.4. Unemployment rate stayed the same at 4.9. And we had 8.6 million people who are supposedly employed but are not getting paid. How in the world the Federal Reserve can actively think about they need to raise interest rates because the economy is overheating is crazy. Because yesterday, the Purchasing Managers Index came out, and anything above 50 is considered positive. Anything below 50 is a contracting economy. The market estimated, all the economists had estimated that the Purchasing Managers Index would come in at 55. It came in at 51. So all of the, quote, anecdotal information says this economy is going nowhere, and yet the Federal Reserve seems to feel that it's overheating and they have to raise interest rates. I just don't. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
We got figures today that said that the average income surged 5% in the last quarter.
Yeah.
Now, these are government statistics.
Yes.
How does that square with what you just said?
Well, it doesn't square because the hourly income and hourly wages and hourly productivity has been falling, not growing. In fact, household incomes have gone down over the 8 years, almost 8 years that Obama's been president. So a 5% jump in 1 month, funny number, and probably will be revised downward just before the election when it's too late to do anything. As you pointed out in a couple of shows ago, the government has the ability to play with numbers, whatever they want to do, and then they can always revise them to what it should have been later, but that's after the election. So I don't place any real credence that says that average hourly income maybe went up 5 cents, but not 5% in 1 month. It isn't there. So I just don't see a rationale of why the Federal Reserve, and perhaps Mr. Trump is right that we need to get rid of Mrs. Yellen, and we need a new and different direction for monetary policy in the United States. And that brings us to the end of this segment. So, Don,
what would you have me say? You always depress me, Dan, with your outlook on the economy. This is Don Mazzella.
Yeah, and someday I'll have a positive thing to say. This is
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. This is Dan Perkins, and we're the two guys from Verona. We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
You know, Dan, I had lunch today with a very well-connected New Jersey politician, and I asked him a simple question. What do you think about Hillary? And after he stopped laughing...
Was he Democrat or Republican, did you say?
He's a politician.
Oh, okay.
In New Jersey, there's no such thing really.
Yeah.
But anyway, he, after he stopped laughing, he said, "It's amazing how lies can come home to roost." Hillary said, "Well, now I'm going to release my some." She didn't say all. Some of my medical records,
health records,
which immediately left everybody in doubt that they're going to get everything. Everything she says and does so indicates a woman, I won't say an individual, who's so afraid of the people getting too close. I'm told by someone who was with her for many years that to friends she's very warm and friendly, but if you work for her or if you cross her, you really see another side of her. Her failure to deal with this illness question and to go to the events on Sunday and then try to slip away and then not tell people her problems really hurt her. And they're going to hurt her more and more. The interesting thing before we leave it is Donald Trump's handling of it. The old Trump would have really jumped on top of it. The new Trump has been very smart and just let other people talk about it. I can tell you that if you recall last spring, I doubted that she would be the nominee because I heard it within the camp that she was seriously ill. My wife thinks it's Parkinson's. I don't know what it is, but I was told by people inside her camp that there is something wrong with her. But the New York Post put it best in a full-page story today. They showed she had a concussion, she had a hip, she had this, she had that, she has a cough. In short, is she really ready for the presidency, or is she succumbing to the hubris of wanting something so bad she ignores everything else? Back to you, Dan.
Well, as we spoke earlier today in our show prep, I said to you, I am absolutely shocked at the openness of people on the Democratic side talking about her replacement. Cokie Roberts, who left wing as you can get, yesterday did a commentary that the Democrats need to make sure that their process is in place to replace her, and they're openly talking about the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee thinks she needs to be replaced if she's really that sick, and everybody has automatically presumed that it would be Uncle Joe. But as I said to you this afternoon, the Democrats are really in a really hard place because Joe Biden didn't win a single vote in the primary process. Bernie Sanders won a lot of votes. How the Democratic National Committee could pick Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders, I think would alienate such a huge percentage of the Sanders supporters that either they're going to sit out the election or they'll go to somebody else. They may not go to Trump, some may, but I think it would be devastating for the Democratic Party to replace Hillary should her medical condition continue to worsen or we find out more detail with Joe Biden. I understand that supposedly the leadership loves him, but he's tried twice before and didn't do too well. So it seems to me the idea that we can replace him and perhaps they can. I guess there is a point of no return. Do you walk in? I mean, if she does the first debate and she's out of the race and she can't do the second and third. I mean, it's chaos beyond belief. And one of the things I think we'll eventually find out is who knew what when concerning her condition if it turns out to be detrimental, because the Democratic Party is going to pay an incredible price of believability and credibility covering for Hillary. Don?
Don't also forget that the dates for refiling come up very quickly. September 15th is, I think, the cutoff date for a lot of states for substituting on the ballot. And that's just 2 days away. Mm-hmm. But assume, as I did some work, that the actual those that really count, it's the 23rd is the cutoff date. Now that's before the
first debate.
First debate.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very interesting point. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Hillary, I believe, will fight to her last breath to be president. I think she, if my sources are correct, she is absolutely adamant and was told not to do the race in the spring. That's something new I learned. Whether it's true or not, I cannot verify. But I was told that last spring, when she really was down in terms of health, she was told not to run. But we'll find out in the next 10 days. But I've been wrong about Hillary all this time.
You might turn out to be ultimately be right. Save your bacon if she can't complete the race. The other thing is that it was interesting is that I know this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but that's okay. I'm allowed to say this. She basically had a Mitt Romney moment on Friday night at that fundraiser where she condemned half of Trump's voters as being racist, bigots, homophobes, sexist, and everything else you can think of. And a lot of people reacted to that. But if you look at what she said on Saturday morning, she basically didn't apologize for what she said. She apologized for the percentage. Maybe it wasn't as high as she thought it was. So she still thinks that some percentage of Trump supporters are racist, bigots, and homophobes and sexist. But here's the twist. Was Sunday part of the distraction created to take the heat off of what she said on Friday?
I don't think so, because Sunday really hurt Clinton, and she's got to bounce back. But you and I both have had pneumonia, and pneumonia takes a while to really get out of your system and get your strength back.
Yes.
It's a good conspiracy theory, and it might hold. It's interesting. A bigot can also be a bigot who hates white people. We use words, we throw them around, and sometimes I think just as many bigots who are black about whites as there are whites about blacks. And I don't know. I don't think anybody can use the word bigot anymore. I don't think anybody can use a lot of words, racist, because as we said last week, we now have dormitories where blacks can stay with blacks, and soon I'm told the first Asian group has already asked for its own dormitory. So everybody's throwing around words, but in the end, we're not talking to each other.
Agreed, and I think that is that. I saw a wonderful analysis of Friday through Sunday, how the Clinton campaign was reluctant to tell its limited pool reporters what was actually going on. They said nothing while she was transferred from the 9/11 memorial to her Chelsea's house. She very controlling, and that's what she did with the emails and everything else. She's lets pieces out. She lies about them, and then she lies about what she lied about. On and on and on. Anyway, we need to move to our commercial. Don Mazzella.
Don Mazzella.
Yes.
And Dan Perkins. Let's hear a commercial.
Yeah, two guys from Verona. Remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
Well, Dan, I'm going to start by telling you we have a real problem. It's called North Korea. You know that they test fired a missile from a submarine. The interesting thing is the submarine was underwater, which surprised the American intelligence people. It means that by 2020, if our intelligence people are right, and they are right usually much more than they're wrong, North Korea will have the capability of hitting about 60% of the United States, including Los Angeles, Reno, Nevada, and possibly even as far as Chicago. It's a bad omen for us. It's a bad omen no matter who is president next January 20th, that they will be left with a humongous problem. Also, China is using North Korea as a surrogate for its own ambitions, because China could close down the program tomorrow if it wanted to, and there's no reason that it wants to. So if you ask for my prediction, start looking at North Korea very closely because they're on a path towards us. Back to you.
Well, let me just follow that real quick. What, from an economic standpoint, what does China gain by endangering its largest trading partner, us?
Don't forget, China, I still call it Red China. China has one ambition to be the dominant power in Southeast Asia. Whether you want to admit it or not, and President Obama does not want to admit it, they're reaching out south, they're reaching out north, they're reaching out east, and heck, Vietnam, traditionally one of our worst enemies, is now seeking arms and support from the United States because they recognize what a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia, if China is not stopped. So how does China get a nuclear capability without risking world condemnation? They could march into North Korea tomorrow and take it all up. And don't think that's not a scenario that's not being vetted by the Chinese. They have 4 divisions. Now, the North Korean army is very good, but they're not going to stand up to 4 divisions of Chinese top troops. Why are those divisions sitting on the Yalu River right across from North Korea? Not for their health.
Well, but I look at it from the standpoint, again, you talk about power, China has the second largest economy in the world. And depending upon how you count, maybe the largest economy in the world ahead of the United States, because our economy hasn't grown much for 8 years. So why does the Chinese want to risk their economy by allowing North Korea to try and attack the United States? What do they gain?
Well, don't forget, if you look at the economy, the Chinese have been reaching Africa, Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia. They want to be the dominant power. They believe in it. What did Napoleon say? Let China sleep, for when it awakens, the world will tremble. Well, we're reaching that point today. We've got to look at Red China, and understand that at some point, the 2 great superpowers, China and the United States, will clash on many fields, economically, militarily, and China is just lying up the ducks while President Obama fiddles at home.
If you follow your logic, then if North Korea is the surrogate for China's nuclear program, at some point in time, obviously Obama won't be president, but perhaps at some point in time, if the UN decides to put sanctions, and they haven't so far, on North Korea for violating the proliferation treaty, what's to prevent us from sending our aircraft over to take out their nuclear capabilities?
Nothing. Nothing at all. But it will take an act of courage by whoever president to do such a thing. Of course, they could delegate it to another country, South Korea, etc. Don't forget the South Koreans are worried about this as well.
Sure.
They have much more to lose than a lot of other countries. And when you contrast the two, it's amazing. And don't forget the South Korean army is probably one of the top armies in the world. And could it take out the nuclear facilities? Yes. But it would be long and difficult and involve the loss of many lives. And then South Korea will not act without the support of the United States. And again, we come back to it. You need a president with what the Spaniards call cojones to really move forward on that.
And I don't think we have that president in the White House. And I'm not sure if we had Hillary that would happen either. Well, we're out of time. This is Dan Perkins.
Don Mazzella.
We're the two guys from Verona. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. For more information about Dan and Don, please visit twoguysfromverona.com. Tune in again next week to hear two guys from Verona give their unique take on today's world. Until then, have a great day, and remember to keep faith in America.